Well, I finally did it. I finished the Dread Empire series by Glen Cook. This series is nothing like the Black Company in a few ways. One of which is it's third person instead of first person, so that's a pretty obvious start. And in another way that it's different, it is all of Glen Cook's strengths and weaknesses amplified. I think with the Black Company, a lot of his overall weaknesses are toned down and you just get magnificent writing. Well, in this, you get that magnificent writing elevated to another level, but you also have a lot of his flaws, just they're a lot more in the way in this. I think that one of the biggest things to take away from the Dread Empire series is this was Glen Cook at his most ambitious. He did not care about what anyone else thought when he wrote these books. I don't think he cared ever when it came to what he was writing. He just wanted to tell the stories he wanted to tell. What I want to do in this video is give like a brief synopsis of each book and kind of my thoughts on them. Not too much of a synopsis because I don't want to spoil anything, but I just kind of want to talk about the series as a whole, and I want to give my suggested reading order and just kind of give my overall thoughts on the series. I will also use this as a guide on what format to read the series in. This is a limited edition hardcover of A Cruel Wind, which is the first 3 books published in the series. Mine signed by Glen Cook and Jeff Vandermeer. Pretty cool. The first 3 books are A Shadow of All Night Falling, October's Baby, and All Darkness Met. Now, A Shadow of All Night Falling starts off in a really interesting way, in like a way I didn't expect in a fantasy novel. The world building is incredibly immersive, and one of the things that I found the most fascinating is this book does not read like it was published in 1979. The prose is just decades ahead of other people writing at the time. I was really impressed with that aspect alone. It starts off just throwing you in. It's just like, all right, figure it out, stupid. Some people will not like that at all. I'm fine with it. If I'm jumping into a new fantasy world, I don't care if they throw me in the deep end. I will just enjoy the ride and figure it out as I go along. That's part of the joy of being in these fantasy worlds, is figuring out what's happening. October's Baby is a jump in quality compared to the first book, which I knew that going in. It was one of the few things I could find online when it came to kind of how the books were overall. As a quick aside, there is very little info about these books on the internet. Like, almost no one has read them. It's kind of crazy. There's no wikis or anything, and that made this a little more difficult than it should have been. You get to follow 2 of the characters that were kind of side characters in the first book, which are Mocker and Braggy. And Mocker is Kruppa from Malazan. Like, they talk the exact same. And no one is ever going to be like, oh, they accidentally wrote to sound like Mocker. No. It was an homage. Erickson has said so. You follow those 2 through most of the second book. And one of the interesting things is these are epic military fantasy novels. Glen Cook does a really good job of adding in some of like the humor that people have in harrowing times like war. I think it's really fascinating how good he is at being able to add just a little bit of a bright spot in something as devastating as a civil war. I just really enjoyed that in October's Baby, and I know he does that in the Black Company, but it's just good to see that he can do it in more than one place. October's Baby is a very good book. I'll mention it now, and I might mention it again later, but one of the flaws in these books is they kind of drag about 60% of the way through the book. It happens in Black Company books too. There's just like this dip in pacing, and things just slow down a ton, but then they ramp right back up. And, you know, in Glen Cook fashion, you're left just overawed and broken by the time the book is over. All of these books have great endings, so you don't have to worry about that going in. You just have to understand that along with all the good of Glen Cook, you're going to have an amplification of his flaws. In book 3, All Darkness Met, there's a lot of highs and lows because of the pacing, because it feels like it follows the same plot structure as the second book. And I will say that one of the things I suffered from in this is it covers a lot of the Dread Empire. And as ironic as it sounds, when you're focusing on the Dread Empire part of this fantasy world, it's very boring. At least it was for me. Some people might love it and it'll be flipped, where their problem is like the Western style civilizations versus the Dread Empire, which is very influenced by Imperial China. But I will say that, of course, yet again, it ends amazingly. So you don't have to worry about that with All Darkness Met. You could read Just a Cruel Wind as a complete trilogy and be happy. But, as I will get into in a second, I don't recommend starting with A Cruel Wind. You have A Fortress in Shadow, which is book 4 and 5 in the Dread Empire series. They're actually prequels, and they take place in the Middle Eastern equivalent in the Dread Empire series. What it follows are a side character from the original trilogy and a main character from the original trilogy and from the final trilogy. The really interesting thing is it's a holy war essentially in the Middle East. I really, really enjoy the way they're written. It is also Bragi and Mocker's origin story. I suggest you read these two first. Read them in chronological order. Don't read them in publication order. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say publication order always, but here's my argument against that. Glen Cook planned all of this stuff long before he wrote the first book. So these stories in these prequels were planned and ready to go around the same time the original trilogy was written. He just happened to write the original trilogy first. There's nothing in the prequels that ruins the original trilogy. There will be a bit of a dip in quality of writing because book 4 and 5 are written around the same time he wrote the first few Black Company novels. So he was cooking. I just want to give you my advice, which is read the prequels first. I wish I would have done it that way. The prequels suffer a bit because you know who survives them and you know who wins these battles and epic things that happen in the prequels by reading the first trilogy. Another thing is, A Shadow of All Night Falling, the first book written, follows characters that later become side characters, and the side characters in it are the ones that become the main characters, and they're also the people that are in the prequels. So when you go into it, your investments are flipped. It kind of just lessened the experience for me. But if I would have read the prequels first and I would have saw like my boys in A Shadow of All Night Falling as side characters, I would have been happy. I'd be like, hey, look, I know those guys. That's cool. They're here. Overall, I just highly recommend you read them first. They have the same issues as the other ones. They slog in some of the battles, but the battles are really good. The characters are really dynamic. You get this building of a brotherhood between Bragi and one of the characters in here, and you get to see what made Mocker Mocker. Start with those prequels, and let's move on to something that is not the next set in the series. An Empire Unacquainted with Defeat. This is a short story collection. Mine is the limited edition, and it is signed. I got lucky I found it. Has a little crinkle in the corner, and for some reason, the seller thought, well, let me sell this for 1/5 the price that the other ones go for. You can't even tell it's damaged. And now I have a signed collection of short stories from Glen Cook. Another signed collection of Glen Cook stories. That's for another video. This is another one of those things like the best of Glen Cook, where he writes like little tidbits at the beginning of each story. So you actually get to hear from Glen Cook himself about these stories. These are great. The short stories span all the way from like 1969 or something up to the 2010s, I think. They're just great. They're little pieces of the history of the Dread Empire. And in here is when I found out he had planned on making a 14-book series out of the Dread Empire. He built the Dread Empire universe to create a playground for him to just tell stories he wanted to tell. He wanted to use it as his like eternal format. And someone stole his manuscripts for book 8 and book 9. And he was like, oh, I'm out. And that was in like 1989. So then you had a 24-year gap between book 7 and book 8. Luckily, he came back and he finished it, and we'll get into those in a second. But yeah, some of these short stories he managed to rewrite after he found little bits of manuscript. And then one of the short stories happened to be at a publisher who ended up not publishing it and sending back the manuscript. So he's like, oh, cool. This one didn't get stolen. The short stories are great. I suggest reading them anytime after the first 3 books or the first 5. It doesn't really matter at that point. You will already know enough about the Dread Empire series to get invested in the short stories, but don't read them early on because the Dread Empire world is huge and you will get lost. I was getting lost later in the series because there's a lot of geography, there's a lot of people, but after like book 4 or 5, you know the world well enough that you can go into the short stories and not be lost. I read one of the short stories before I started the series. I barely remember it because I was trying to process what was happening and what all these proper nouns were. And so I definitely want to go back and read it now, and I think I'll have more of an appreciation for it. Well, here we are. Wrath of Kings. Fun fact, Wrath of Kings was supposed to be the name of the final book in the series, and instead it's the name of the trilogy that ended the series. A Path to Coldness of Heart is what he ended up calling the last book, and that's the one he wrote 24 years later. Well, and here we've got Reap the East Wind, and I will say Reap the East Wind has a good ending, but it was by far the weakest of the entire series. Reap the East Wind and An Ill Fate Marshalling both tell the same story. So Reap the East Wind is like 60% of An Ill Fate Marshalling, just seen from a different perspective. But An Ill Fate Marshalling is better written in every way. I really think that with some heavy chopping of Reap the East Wind, you could have put them together and made a better book. But I don't think that Glen Cook wanted to do that, and I don't think his publisher wanted to do that. If you look at the series overall, each one is about the same length, except for the final book. And I think that was intentional. It was like, we want these stories to come out every 6 months, which I think they did, or a year. And we want them to be, whatever, 230 pages or whatever it ended up being. It was short. I mean, look at this. This book is like 900 and something pages, and it's the last 3 books in the series. I'm going to get to that in a little while. This is a good trilogy, though. An Ill Fate Marshalling more than makes up for how slow Reap the East Wind is, and Reap the East Wind is a short book. One of the reasons it suffered was, had a lot of stuff about the Dread Empire in it, and it was boring. It was the best showing of the Dread Empire, but also I just didn't care. When it comes to A Path to Coldness of Heart, the book is weird. The book is very well written, but not quite the same as the rest because it was published 24 years later. But Glen Cook did a great job with it. The characters still feel like they did before. I don't want to name anyone because I don't want you to know who dies and lives because you get to suffer like I did. The series is great overall, and I would love for some of you to give it a chance. And I was thinking about this lately. When people tell you to give a chance to a book series, like Malazan, they usually tell you, book 1 is a little different than the rest. So if you read the first 2 Malazan books and you still don't feel invested, then you can move on. What I'm going to tell you is, if you read the word count equivalent to the first 2 Malazan books and you just read the Dread Empire series, you've pretty much read the entire Dread Empire series. Same goes for the Wheel of Time. The first 2 books are like 575,000 words. People tell you read those 2. If you're still not invested when you're done, don't worry about the rest of the series. Well, if you read 575,000 words of the Dread Empire, you've read everything in the series, including the short story collection. It's incredible. So not only is this a well-written series, the writing is tight, the books are small. You can read an 8-book series in the time it would take you to read 2 books in a modern bloated fantasy series, and they're not missing anything. They don't feel like they're lacking in quality because these 250-page books weren't 3 times the size they needed to be, like a lot of modern stuff. I think that's a major selling point for the book series, is it's not bloated. So you get this great storytelling, and the series has some respect for your time. Now, I've shown you all these books because these are the ones you should get. This one will be incredibly hard to find. This book is like $80 used because it's the last 3 books. And I think the reason why this book is so expensive is because you can get A Cruel Wind for a reasonable price in hardcover. You can get the 2 prequels in a hardcover for a decent price. But in the final trilogy, the only one that was published in a hardcover was the last one, A Path to Coldness of Heart. So you'd have to go big hardcover, decent size hardcover, trade paperback, hardcover for your collection. And I know that's going to annoy a lot of people. And so what a lot of people do, like me, is they pay the $80 for this first edition that was only printed like 1 time. That's one of the reasons it's so hard to get. So if you don't care about physical books, get them on ebook. But what I did, I got these as a collection because I'm slowly collecting every single thing Glen Cook's ever written. I actually listened to them on audiobook. The audiobook narrator is very good. So definitely give them a chance if you just want to get through the books without having to buy some expensive copies, or you don't want to read ebooks. Check out the audiobooks. They are great. I'm not really sure what else to say about the Dread Empire series. So one of my camera lights just died on me. That was cool. I got distracted with that. I wanted to double back real quick and talk about this first edition, first printing of the final book, A Path to Coldness of Heart. There are things that he did in this that I have been looking for in fantasy for over a decade. I couldn't believe that I finally found it. One of the things that the Dread Empire does that's really good, and it's very innovative, and I love that Glen Cook did it, they are an empire built on magic. And when I say they're an empire built on magic, basically they have like the officer class of their military hierarchy, and they're all mages. Like, you are not getting anywhere politically if you do not have magic. One of the reasons why is because your competitors will kill you, and you need to be able to defend yourself. But another reason why you need magic is because they have used magic to subjugate a huge empire and to fight off invaders. Part of that utilization of magic is they've used magic like a technology, and it's gotten better, and it's had these iterative improvements, and you actually see it through the 35 years that this series spans. They had stagnated in the beginning because of the rulers at the time, but once they were gone and you have all this infighting in the Dread Empire, you end up getting very rapid changes, and it's great. Part of that was setting up to deal with the kind of big event at the end of the series. As a quick aside, I don't know how Glen Cook managed to do this, but I just want to mention something, and you'll see it in the books. Glen Cook managed to make a malevolent Deus Ex Machina, and it's not at the end of the books either. So it's not quite a Deus Ex Machina, but it is. It kind of fills that same role as like this thing coming out of nowhere and just like propelling things forward. And that's part of the way the Dread Empire world is built. There are like these strings, like these puppet strings, and they're kind of controlling these things. And part of the mystery of the series is figuring out why the events are being manipulated to happen the way they are. And it's just so good. And another thing in the final trilogy is you see a lot of the human side of these fantastical characters. You've got this big bad wizard that's been through the whole series, and you really see his human side. You see him make mistakes because he's being jealous or just stupid, and you see him trying to make up for those mistakes and just being the guilt he feels. And you see these kings that have united people and have never made mistakes, and they've just basically gotten high on their own supply, and it has cost them everything. And there's this one scene, and it didn't have to be there. And these books are short, so I'm surprised that it was even left in there and not put on the cutting room floor. This guy is frustrated with what's happening, and he's just by a gravestone of someone he cared about, and he's just throwing rocks at a tree just out of frustration. And he throws one, and he feels a pain in his elbow. And so he throws another, and the pain hits him, and he doesn't throw it very hard. He doesn't hit the tree he was aiming at. Well, he picks up another rock, and he's all pissed off, and he hurls it as hard as he can, and he says he feels a snap in his elbow or a pop. He tore his UCL. And it's like, why is this even here? Like, this guy just tore a ligament in his elbow, and like, there's no reason for it to be in the story, but it's one of those things that Glen Cook puts in there because, like, you will have moments like that in your life where things are not working the way you want them to, and you try to exercise some of your frustration, and you end up either hurting yourself or making things worse. And I'm really happy that that is in here. And it's not the first time it's happened. In one of the earlier books, there's this terrible event where a lot of people who mean a lot to a certain group in the series die. And the husband of one of the characters that dies rushes there to see what's happened. And before he even goes in, he stops and he takes a moment to cry and grieve with one of his oldest friends. And in a lot of books, they would just gloss right over that. He would rush in because, you know, the plot propels him in there to see what happened, and then maybe he would grieve afterwards. But, I mean, that's not how life works. In life, you have these horrible moments, and before you face them, you take a moment to make sure that the people around you are okay. And like I said, you don't see that in a lot of books, and it really meant a lot to me to see it in a book series. Well, this has been a really long way of me saying the Dread Empire series is great. Is the Dread Empire series for everyone? Absolutely not. This series does not care whether you get lost in it, does not care whether you understand anything. Glen Cook was writing this to tell the stories he wanted to tell, and it's kind of left to you to figure out what's going on. I'm not saying that he writes it in a confusing way. I'm just saying he drops you in, and there's not a lot of exposition to help you understand what's going on in the world. You got to figure it out. The same way you got to figure it out when you start a new job and you don't know anyone and you don't know what's happening in this workplace and you slowly put the pieces together, or you move to a new city and you got to slowly figure things out. If you want things spoon-fed to you, this is not the series for you. If you don't like when really uncomfortable things happen, then this series is not for you. If you're a very big fan of Glen Cook, you need to read this series. It gives you an exploration of his skills as a writer in ways you haven't seen in other books he's written. Like I said, the series is short. So if you want to give it a chance, start with the prequels. It's about half the size of your normal new fantasy novel. So read those prequels, you enjoy it, grab A Cruel Wind because it's the size of a normal fantasy novel, except it's 3 books. And by the time you're done with that, the sunk cost fallacy has sunk in and you're like, it's only 3 more books. It's only 900 pages. Might as well get this done. Experience what's happening in this wonderful world. I want to thank you for watching. If you liked this, I've got some other Glen Cook reviews. I've got some chats about my Glen Cook reading project where I read everything Glen Cook has written this year in 2024. I'm a little over halfway done. Things are going great. If you want to check that out, I'll be posting more about this and other works of science fiction, fantasy, regular fiction. If I read it, chances are I'm going to talk about it. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.